Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/084, and you can email me at the show, pedalshift@pedalshift.net. You can check Pedalshift out also on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 84th edition of the Pedalshift Project. I'm Tim Mooney, and I am excited to share this really great episode with you to talk all about my adventures bicycling Western Pennsylvania, the Montour Trail, the Gap, the Panhandle Trail, all of it, and bring that to you in this episode. So we'll be focusing a lot on the journal, but I've also got a little bit in connections and gear talk as well, so let's get cracking. First up, of course, is the journal, and we're going to be just diving right into the Western Penn edition of Pedalshift. In the 8th edition of Pedalshift Tour Journals, just to give you an idea on that, is going to be coming out probably in the next couple of weeks or so. What I've decided to do this go around, if you're a newsletter subscriber, hopefully you got a chance to listen to sort of the nightly builds of everything. I did a nightly summary of everything that I did on this 5 days. Hope you enjoyed that. That was fun to do. I also did what I normally do, which is record a whole lot more audio involved in it as well. And the idea is, rather than give you sort of this deconstructed, raw audio for Pedalshift Tour Journals, I'm going to be doing a little bit more on the production side. So think of it more like what I did with episode 10 of the show with the Pacific route, except of course it's not going to be a 6-week long trip. It's the 5-day trip. So it's a lot more detail, but a little bit more produced. So that's going to be coming out in a little bit, but I wanted to tell the story just so that everybody gets a chance to experience this through my storytelling. And then if you'd like, you can support the show and get Pedalshift Tour Journals Volume 8 down the line. Okay. Enough of that. Let's talk about it. The route, this was a 5-day adventure that included the Montour Trail, and I did that in segments, a hefty helping of the Panhandle Trail, and I did most of that. I missed pieces of that. And I did a great through ride of the Great Allegheny Passage, and then a little bit on top of that as well. If you check out the show notes, and that's pedalshift.net/084, I'm going to embed the map in, so that you get a chance to see sort of how it all went down. The idea of the whole thing was to try to link up a little bit on the Eastern Express that we talked about on episode 79. And I was originally going to be going all the way to Steubenville. And as I discovered with the heat, and we'll talk a lot more about the heat, that ended up not happening. I actually could have gone just an extra, I think 5 or so miles to get to that point to kind of check it out. But just given the conditions that were there, I decided that it wasn't really necessary. Plus, I thought that there were other people that have done the reconnaissance on all of that. But I really just wanted to enjoy the trails, and I really, really enjoyed the trails. They were fantastic. It was nearly 300 miles, and as I mentioned, did I mention? It was freaking hot. It was usually every day into the low 90s with high humidity. Heat index on some of the days got up to about 100. Most of the days it was in the upper 90s. And of course, this is all Fahrenheit. So for all you metric folks, your Celsius types, do the math, 9/5 minus 32 or whatever it ends up being. Anyways, Google it. Like 30 something, I think. It was hot. So let me break this down by talking a little bit about the route and then the highlights and then maybe some lessons learned, which I think is an effective way to kind of tell all of the story. Again, if you go to the show notes and take a look at that map, you'll be able to see how it all started. I took the train up to a town called Connellsville, Pennsylvania. Now, Connellsville is quite a bit south of Pittsburgh. It's the last train stop on the Amtrak Capital Limited until you get to Pittsburgh. It drops you off normally around 9:30 or so. Unfortunately, that night it was about an hour late. It was really slow coming from Ohiopyle, which is a little further south from there. It's where there's a state park. And I joked with some of the folks who were hopping off the train at the same stop as I was that I feel like that we could have ridden our bikes a little bit faster from there and gotten into Connellsville ahead of the train. But that being said, it got me there, probably in the 10 o'clock hour or so, 10:30 maybe. And the best part about that was it was really, really close to the Martin's grocery store. And behind that, really literally, and I cannot emphasize enough, literally on the trail, there are about 3 or 4 different Adirondack shelters there that are set up by the town and the local businesses. So it's super easy camping and really, really, really well put together. There's water there. Of course, you got the grocery store so you can stock up. So I had a really easy beginning, just a ride up. It was a kind of a full day. It's about a 5-ish, 6-ish hour ride up there. Amtrak did just fine with everything. I think that the interesting thing that I've been finding is how sometimes the bike setup is easy and sometimes it's not so easy. And sometimes the conductors will be super helpful and sometimes they really just want to let you do your own thing. I found that the instructions that were given to some of the other folks who were riding wasn't very helpful for them to get their bikes on there because it's not really intuitive and they don't have instructions up on the walls there in the baggage car for the bikes to hang on. And I think that would be something that Amtrak should consider, rather than just sort of have it be left up to the conductors. Cause frankly, they're busy. They've got to get people trained. They got to assign seats. Sometimes they got a lot of stuff going on. And, I was able to help some folks who had, bikes and get them up, from the DC to Connellsville. They were going all the way to Pittsburgh, but, it just sometimes is not super intuitive. I've done it a few times, so I know what I'm doing. But that ended up working out really well. So got up to Connellsville. I'd never ridden from Connellsville. I'd never gotten off or on the train at Connellsville. And I just knew that it was really close to where I wanted to camp for the night. What I found really interesting was how oddly difficult it was, even with Google Maps giving me turn by turns, to get to the Martin's grocery store. You have to kind of maneuver around some highway on-ramps, and it just wasn't super intuitive, which kind of makes, it can't expect that everything's going to be intuitive. But I thought, hey, I've got a freaking computer on my bike that is giving me turn-by-turn directions, and I still had to stop and get my bearings a bunch of times. So it was kind of strange how that all ended up working out. But anyways, got there, got the hammock up, and end of day 0, as it were, was just fine. I found that night it dropped into, I think, the mid to up, maybe even, the mid 60s, I'd say, give or take. And I found I was cold. When I sleep in a hammock, man, it's got to be a hot night, really, for me. I'm very rarely someone who I would consider tough in cold weather, or tough. I don't like below freezing camping. But man, in a hammock, just that little bit of wind underneath you, it just sucks all of the heat away from you. And I found myself waking up frequently and I was chilly because there was no conservation of heat whatsoever. And there's ways to get around that. You can put down certain types of pads. You can do underquilts and stuff like that. But it's just a lot, especially for a summer kind of ride. And I did bring my tent, intending to use the tent most of the time. Just when you've got hooks in an Adirondack shelter and it's hot out, you're like, I want to lie down and ease on back in this hammock. And for sleeping, I just found it wasn't really helpful. I've had some great nights sleeping in hammocks and others not so much. So the hammock came in handy for other nights. And I think that I have decided that I'm definitely going to be taking it with me, just because it is such a small, light thing to throw into a bag when I'm riding, maybe not fully heavy, but at least I'm taking a couple of panniers with me, or otherwise have a fair amount of storage. It's such a great thing at the end of the day to be able to hook that thing up, kick back and lean back. It's just a nice, and we talked about this in the yoga episode with Kimberly, that it's a counter pose that, when you're kind of hunched over a bike all day, it's nice to kind of lean back and kind of relax your spine a little bit inside of a hammock. And that's why I think it's always going to be coming with me, whether I use it for sleeping or not. Again, the hammock that I have, I think, was $20. I got it on Amazon. It's super lightweight. I've got tree straps that were 10 extra bucks on top of that. So I can basically hang it from pretty much any place. So I'd recommend that for folks that want that little bit of extra comfort out on the trails when you're camping, or maybe even when you're not camping. I mean, if you're at a B&B or something like that and they've got trees someplace, that'd be kind of nice to have. So woke up the next morning and went to the Martins and got all stocked up. I think I've mentioned this on the show a couple of times that I'm trying to, I've lost a lot of weight. I've lost nearly 40 pounds and quite a bit of body fat over the last, let's say 6 months or so, since the beginning of January. I've done it mostly through intermittent fasting and basically not eating sugar. The trick with touring is intermittent fasting is just not a good idea, at least for me, I don't think. And I decided to relax my take on sugar for this ride, for this tour, mainly because I knew that I would have a need for a lot of calories and I would be burning them really quickly, and sugars are just a lot more available. It's just, basic food for athletics kind of a thing. I know there are a lot of people that do it without it. But I decided to relax things a little bit. But for the most part, for the meals, I wanted to kind of stay away from all of that. So it was a lot of kind of higher protein things. I did get tortillas and peanut butter and cherries, just sort of basic stuff, but some more whole foods as best as I could, knowing full well that I would be stopping at places along the trail as well. Well, at least that's what I thought. I ended up not doing that quite as much, and that was fine. It ended up working out. It was just good that I had enough food with me. I even had my emergency pack of freeze-dried potatoes if I needed that. Those things where you just add hot water and you go with it. Sidebar, of course, I did bring my stove with me, and because I had the room and it wasn't all that big of a deal in terms of weight or whatever. But what surprised me greatly was I didn't make coffee that morning or really any morning that I was out, except for the very last morning before I came back home. And that's surprising, but also not surprising for me. I think that I find that when it's warm out, the prospects of making a hot cup of coffee in the morning just don't appeal to me too much. So for my sort of caffeine performance boost type of a thing, I relied on my tried and true caffeine pills, and that's what I did on the first day there, rolling out of Connellsville. So that all ended up working really well. And there you are right on the gap around mile marker 88. And I went north, and I had already plotted this all out. And for those of you who, again, if you wanted to see the route, go to pedalshift.net/084 and you can check it out. I did it all on Ride with GPS. Ride with GPS was a really handy tool for these places that I was unfamiliar with. Now, when you're on the gap and you're going, north or south, it's not that big of a deal to do that. You don't really need directions for that. But for a lot of the first 2 days, it was going to be some unfamiliar places and some unfamiliar timing with getting off of the trails. And from what I understood, some trickiness with the trails and how they interacted with each other, especially the gap going to the Montour and then the Montour going to the Panhandle Trail. So I was really happy to have that. And because I had enough battery power with me, it wasn't any problem to have the phone kind of sort of on all the time doing these directions. I found Ride with GPS did a very nice job from a power management perspective. I was using an iPhone. I don't know how it is on Android, but I found it was pretty good. I kept the screen off when I didn't need it. And that worked out pretty well. I was pleasantly surprised. I thought I was going to have to be recharging my battery quite a bit during the day or keep it plugged into an external battery, but I found that wasn't an issue. So that first day I ended up going north, and then there was a certain point around Boston or so, Boston, Pennsylvania, where there's a road route or a connection really that is called, I think, the Steel Valley Trail. And calling it a trail was a bit of a misnomer because it was really just a collection of signs on local streets. But it worked out. It's kind of in the very industrial area of the southern portion of the Pittsburgh metro area. And it was a little bit confusing if you didn't have a GPS with you. And it worked out just fine because I did. But it connected me up with the Montour very quickly and very easily around a town called Clairton. And I was able to hook up with that and roll along, and it worked out really, really, really well. And it was, as I mentioned, it was hot, but I had plenty of water with me, and I was able to take breaks as necessary. This was a 70-mile day, which for me is a pretty heavy day for any day of touring when I'm riding fully loaded. So it did take a lot out of me, but I did eventually get to a point where it was actually not a problem at all. And so I ended up at these, it was the Cecil Hendersonville campground. And it was really nice. It also had an Adirondack, but that had already been claimed by somebody. There were 4 or 5 spots. So I ended up pitching my tent, and it worked out really well. I had the food that I purchased earlier in the day, and it ended up being just great. I really had a fine ride, and everything went pretty well. The one thing that happened on day 1 that was a bit of, I don't want to say a crisis, but I was having trouble with my rear tire again, and I've been having trouble with that tire. Wow, the last several rides I've had flats. And I think that there was a problem. There's some issue with the wheel or something that gets into my tire, something that just isn't behaving very well. Because normally these tires, the Schwalbe Marathon Supremes, they're pretty puncture resistant. But I think I'm finding that they're just they don't behave as well as maybe the Schwalbe Marathon Plus. So I get a little bit better rolling resistance, or a little less rolling resistance for what I get, but I am getting more flats than I think that I ever got with the Schwalbe Marathon Pluses. So I'm considering maybe making a change at some point. But in any event, I ended up, it was yet another instance where I was a few miles away from camp and I was having trouble with my tire. You remember last year I had this problem about the same time last year on the C&O. And so I got to the point where I was like, well, I can strip everything off of my bike in this 90-degree heat, flip the bike over, take the wheel off, change it, do all of this. But it just seemed like a lot of effort considering I only had a few miles to go until camp. So I kept pumping up my tire and it got to the point where I couldn't even get a full mile before I had to pump it up again. So I was about 2 miles away from camp at that point. I had done it maybe 3 or 4 times. And all of a sudden I come rolling up on the Tandem Connection, the very, very, very excellent Tandem Connection I believe they're in Hendersonville. If I want to make sure that I'm giving Dave the right plug there. Tandemconnection.com. I am ordinarily a self-sufficient person and I can change my own tire and I can do all of these things. It's no problem. But 68 miles into a 70-mile ride on a 90-degree day, I was like, well, let me go in there and maybe get some tire liners because that seems to be an issue. Why don't I just get some tire liners? I thought maybe there was a spur someplace on the spot where the spokes meet the wheel or something like that. I thought, why don't I just get those? And they had those, and I was all set to buy them and go take off from there. And Dave, the owner, came in. His daughters, I guess they were his daughters, were mine in the shop at that point. And he said, hey, why don't I just take a look? And I was like, okay, yeah, cool. And I thought, why not? Let somebody else do it. I was enjoying a little bit of a break, and he was able to sort of figure out all sorts of different elements as to why I was getting this flat, except for, unfortunately, the ultimate cause. We ruled out a whole bunch of different things, but I still decided to get the tire liners put in. And it was just nice to have somebody else do a flat change for me. It was the first time that's happened in years that I've had somebody else handle a flat for me. And wow, it was pretty good. He also identified something problematic with my tire. Apparently, at some point, I had taken a nick out of the sidewall of that tire yet again. And he was concerned, and I think rightfully so, that with one of those Schwalbe Marathon Supremes, that their sidewalls are a little bit lighter than other tires. And, you never knew. I could end up with the same type of blowout situation that I have had with other tires in the past. I don't know what it is with me nicking sidewalls, but apparently I do it. So he was like, well, I'll circle it so you can keep an eye on it. And I asked him if he had other tires in stock, and he had a folding Continental that actually worked out really well. And I got it, and he gave me a discount, which I didn't even ask for one. It was so really nice of him to do. But I carried it with me the whole time, ensuring the fact that my tire would not blow out, and it didn't for the rest of the ride. But thank you, Dave. Thank you to Tandem Connection. If you are on the Montour Trail and it is literally steps off of the trail, it couldn't have been at a better time. It was the one of a handful of bike shops that I had access to on the trail, and it came at a really good time. So anyways, that's a really lengthy diatribe on day one. I don't think I'm going to spend as much time talking about my days as anything else, but still worthy to talk about. Day 2 was also a fun day because I ended up continuing on the Montour. And then what I did was I hooked up with the Panhandle Trail. The Panhandle Trail starts just west of Pittsburgh and runs kind of on an east-west line, and it goes all the way to Steubenville, Ohio. It's called the Panhandle Trail because it crosses the northern panhandle of West Virginia. And so what I decided to do was another hot day. It was going to be another 70-mile day if I went all the way to Steubenville. When I woke up the next day on day 2, it was just too much. It was too much for me to handle. And I also, as I started riding, found that unlike other parts of the Gap and the Montour Trail, the Panhandle Trail is very exposed to sun. And so on top of it being super hot, it was a very open ride. And so I decided, probably even before the day kind of kicked off, but definitely as I was riding, that I wasn't going to go all the way to Steubenville, because that would have added an extra 10. Well, I think it would have actually added it was probably about 18 extra miles. Now, I think it was supposed to be a 68-mile day, and it ended up being a 52. So do the math there. 60. It's probably about 8 extra miles. And I only rode as far as the Pennsylvania-West Virginia border. And I was glad I did that because it was really a nice trail. And what an interesting and great escape to connect with that all the way to Ohio and all of the great riding that's in Ohio. I'm looking forward to maybe doing something with that later. I talked about that, of course, on the last episode of the show, or 2 episodes, pardon me, ago. And, I'm intrigued with it as a gateway to bigger and better things for a cross-country route. I think Frank has since changed the Eastern Express route to go further south and not go to Steubenville. But I do think that linkage with the Panhandle Trail is really cool and really good. And it was really kind of fun. There was a great old state line sign there that I got a picture of, and it was just great. So I was really happy to have done that. I was so bundled up, though. I was just covered head to toe because of all of the sun exposure. I had a big wide brimmed hat that I rarely use for biking because I don't need it usually, but boy, did I need it that day. And had the arm sunshades on and everything like that. It was a hot, sunny day. But it was great. So when I turned around, the idea was to hook up back with the Montour Trail, and I was going to be continuing along a different segment, continuing along. It's kind of a crescent shaped trail that covers, from south of Pittsburgh all the way up to the Ohio River. Not technically in Pittsburgh at that point. I think it's in Coriopolis is the name of that town, which is north and west of Pittsburgh proper. So I continued back. I backtracked on the trail, on the Panhandle Trail, hooked back up with the Montour again, and then went a few miles and got up to the Boggs campsite. And that one was funny. I ran into a guy on the trail, and he was, I don't know, it's kind of sketchy. And I was thinking, is this yet another example of somebody saying that something is sketchy when it really isn't? And it wasn't. It was fine. It was really good. In fact, there was this great big parking area. This isn't like the suburbs someplace. I didn't quite understand what he was getting at, but it was fine. Nobody else was camping there that night. There were 2 different spots. There was an Adirondack shelter as well, which was handy because actually that afternoon, I should say, it did rain a little bit. So I was able to set up my tent, get all my gear inside, but actually ride out the storm inside that shelter, and then got a little bit of relief from all of the heat and humidity that was going on. That was the first of it, but it wasn't a lot. And I could have used a little bit more relief that night, but not so much. Wasn't too buggy, was pretty fine. Loved the hammock. Noticed in the garbage cans that there was Chinese food and pizza boxes. So I think that the delivery services would come there from one of the nearby towns, but I had food left with me, and I just didn't feel like calling up going, do you guys deliver to the campsite? And have them be like, yeah, sketchy dude says what? Even though there was demonstrable evidence of food from those places in the bin. Anyways, I digress. I think in retrospect, perhaps I regret not getting Chinese food that night. Maybe because I want Chinese food right now. Who knows? Anyways, that was the end of day 2. And day 3 was an interesting one because I had learned that the Pittsburgh Penguins had won the Stanley Cup. I think it was that last night I was in Connellsville. or the first night I was in Connellsville. And I knew that generally speaking, if it's a Sunday win, then usually it's a couple of days. I figured that it would be that day that there would be a parade to celebrate winning the cup. And I was dead on right. The parade was in Pittsburgh that next morning. And so as I was sitting there kind of plotting, I knew that my route took me through Point State Park, which was precisely where the parade was going to end. And there was going to be this big celebration. They were saying there were going to be 500,000 people there, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not a fan of the Pittsburgh Penguins, so watching them hoist a cup, maybe not so much. Sorry, Penn's fans. But in the end, I decided, all right, I'm not going to modify my route too much. I had identified a different bridge that would connect me with the Gap that would have been different than going through Point State Park. So I had that in my back pocket. But as I was going, I got up at a decent hour. I got rolling. It was a great ride all the way down to Coriopolis. It was mostly downhill from there, which was really, really great and really fast. Got a great picture of this flag mural, and I've actually changed the Facebook page for Pedalshift, and now it's that. It looks really, really good. Got some really good pictures on this trip. I hope you got a chance to take a look at it. They were on Facebook. They were on, let's see, Twitter. They should have been on Twitter, and they were also on, Instagram as well. So hopefully you can get a chance to check those out. Rolled into Coriopolis, and then it was a little bit of road work. I was able to stop at a 7-Eleven and cool down and get some food, and went across an island in the middle of the Ohio River, which was sort of how the route was, very industrial, but bike laned and fine. And crossed over a really large bridge. It was the McKees Rocks Bridge. It was actually kind of a substantial climb just getting up and over it, but it had a sidewalk, no problems. Really had very few problems in this area. It was not shouldered in a few spots, but everybody was good and the riding was good, and it was pretty low traffic street. So it ended up working out okay. Got to the point where I was getting closer to, I passed by and went into a bicycle museum, and I wish I could remember the name of it. I just occurred to me that I didn't put it in the show notes, but the biggest bike shop / museum I've ever seen. They had thousands of bikes in there, and it was really cool. I have a picture in amongst the pictures of the exterior of it, and I regret not taking pictures inside because it was really, really very cool. A lot of vintage bikes, really cool folks inside. They were trying to help me out with a seat post thingy, technical term. The thing that holds your seat post up a little bit more, that you adjust the saddle height. I thought I was having problems with it, and it turns out it was just greasy. So I fixed it that way. Anyways, that was really cool. I went, continued on, and then as I was getting closer to Point State Park, riding along the Ohio River, I was like, you know what? Why don't I just give this a shot? I looked at the approach to the bridge that I was thinking of taking, and it looked like it wasn't going to be as easy on the other side. The connection wasn't very easy on my side. Yeah, just because of the way the ramps were. I thought, you know what? This trip was supposed to be through Point State Park. I'd like to go there. That's mile marker 150 for the Gap. Let me give it a shot. If it's terrible, I'll turn around and go back and do it the other way. As it turns out, I was totally fine. Yes, there were folks there, but they were in a different part of the park. And in fact, the route that I had to take to get to the bridge that got me on the other side of the Ohio, again, to connect with the Gap or to continue with the Gap, was super easy. And I was all behind all of the humanity. And it didn't seem like there were 500,000 people there by any stretch. A lot of people, don't get me wrong, but not 500,000. So I peeked in, listened to some of the player intros, and then just continued on. And it worked out really, really well. And I was kind of glad for that. You know, I think that anytime you're doing a through ride of the Gap, and that's what at that point I was doing, you really want to start at Point State Park. And I got some cool pictures of the fountain which is the confluence of the three rivers and all of that. Pittsburgh's really a pretty city. I think they've done such a great job rebuilding it in a different image since the change that's gone on of change from industry to, you know, medical and technology and all the other things that Pittsburgh is turning to these days. It's definitely a model for all of the cities that are out there that have seen better days and want to have better days to come. Look at Pittsburgh. That's all I would say. In any event, got along and kept going. And then it was, for the next few days, it was riding the Gap all the way to Cumberland. And, you know, there were some great elements to all of that. It was still hot. Yes. There was rain. Yes. But for the most part, this was a tremendous ride. I really, really, really enjoyed the rest of the days. That would be the second part of day 3. And then days 4 and 5 that took me to, Confluence, and then eventually to Cumberland on Friday. So it was really great. I really enjoyed the ride, and that's sort of a great lowdown on the route, and it took about a half hour talking about, but I wanted to talk about some highlights and just kind of rattle through those off and then talk about some lessons learned. Highlights. I loved segment riding the Montour to completion. There's one extra segment, or maybe 2 extra segments. There's an airport spur, and then there's a southern spur as well that I didn't do. But the main trunk of the Montour I did in its entirety, and I really enjoyed it. I guess it got Trail of the Year. The guy at the Tandem Connection told me that was some award it got from somewhere, and it's well deserved. It's a really good route, and there's nice camping on it. It's pretty great, and I would recommend it. It's about 70 miles all told, so you could conceivably do it all in one day if you wanted to. Or you could split it up and do some camping if you want to do that. There's also some B&Bs and whatnot. And there's a great bike shop, the Tandem Connection. Again, giving a plug because he was so good to me. Huge help, by the way. That was the next thing on my list, by the way, the Tandem Connection in Hendersonville. Go check them out. That rear flat that I got, and it was weird. So I'm glad he was able to help me out. And by the way, it held for the rest of the time. It was great. I love through riding the Gap in terms of highlights from mile marker 150 all the way to mile marker 0. It's really fantastic. I think going from Pittsburgh to DC, this is the first time I've been able to complete a through ride from Pittsburgh to DC. You may remember when I did it with Mysterious James a few years ago. I think that would have been Pedalshift Tour Journals Volume 2, or was that? I can't even remember now. That trip didn't end the way I wanted to. I wanted to go all the way down through the CNO, but I wasn't able to finish it off. So, this worked out, at least to do the Gap from this direction. I think I would say, and this may be more in the lessons learned, but I would say I prefer going DC to Pittsburgh. I think that this cemented it in. I find that, I just prefer it that way from the way the incline is. I'd rather climb that big hill coming from Cumberland and get it done in one shot and then have a gentle downgrade for the next 90 miles rather than having it the other way around where it's this big upgrade from basically Connellsville all the way to the Eastern Continental Divide. It can be a slog, and when there's a little bit of wet like what I had, that trail gets soft real quick, real soft. Another highlight, the wildlife, except for the rattlesnake. I ran into a rattlesnake. I had pictures of it. This was dumb. Beautiful. Let me start off with all the great wildlife. I saw, all sorts of cardinals and, eagles, and the birds were really fantastic. The bird songs in the Pedalshift Tour Journals you'll hear will be fantastic. They were all over the place. I always run into, I always want to say hedgehog, but they are, woodchucks. Woodchucks I ran into a lot of, and then ran into what I thought was your typical garter snake, the same snakes that I've seen on the Gap and on the CNO more so, all the time. And I thought, well, why don't I do I almost said Han Solo, my Indiana Jones snakes. Why does it always have to be snakes picture? Because I'm a child and that's still funny to me. Well, okay, so I pass, I turn around, I turn the bike physically around, fully loaded bike, turn around. I want to get the pannier in the background, take a nice little picture of it and make my joke. And as I take the picture, I notice something. I notice a little twitch at the end of the snake. And I look a little bit closer and I notice that it's got a rattle on the end of it. And I say, holy shit, that's a rattlesnake. And I'd never been that close to a rattlesnake in my life. And they are prevalent in the area. They're extremely prevalent along the Appalachian Trail. If you're a hiker and you're doing that, I've been reading a Through Hiker's blog as he's been doing it right now. And he's got some great pictures of some mean old looking rattlesnakes. Luckily, this one was a lot more chill, although it was pretty big. It was about maybe 4.5 feet long. It was a good sizer. And, it started to just slowly slither to the end of the trail, but I had a moment when I realized that was a rattlesnake. Because, I'm not afraid of wildlife generally, unless I have cause to be. And if I think that something is a non-poisonous constrictor type of snake, like a garter snake, even if it's big, I'm not afraid of it. But then when I realized that's a rattlesnake, I took a few steps back and just slowly slowly backed away. So other than that, the wildlife was a lot of fun. Saw a lot of really cool stuff. There was a report of a black bear. I ran into a guy near Confluence, Pennsylvania, said he saw probably a juvenile black bear by him or herself on the trail. I unfortunately didn't get a chance to see it, but they were there. Ran into this beautiful white cat that was very well cared for and loved. And as it turned out, one other, somebody who follows along and listens to the show pointed out that he'd run into the same white cat before. Apparently this cat is a fixture on the trail and was super friendly as my cat. It was crazy. So wildlife, except for the rattlesnake, was a highlight. I liked exploring Pittsburgh off the beaten path. The route from when I got off the Montour Trail until I reconnected with the Gap was really cool and went through yet another post-industrial portion, and then transitions into downtown Pittsburgh, and then transitions back into the Gap. It was really kind of cool to ride that part, and I really enjoyed that. That was a real highlight for me. I like seeing cities, how they integrate bike travel within their cities, even if it's through parts of town that they probably don't like showing off very much. And this was certainly one of them, but I enjoyed it. Loved hammock lounging every night. I said it before at the top of the show. Bringing a hammock is just such a great thing to have. I think bring it on every trip I have, with the exception of maybe an ultralight trip. But even on an ultralight trip, sometimes I'll have the hammock to sleep. I liked camping every night. I think on the fourth night I had thought maybe I will get a B&B because I was really in need of a shower. I hadn't showered since Sunday, and that was going to be Thursday night. And I just felt gritty and full of, sunscreen and sweat and everything like that. But as it turned out, massive rainstorm in Confluence that night, and it just cooled everything down. And when I checked the campsite, at the Army Corps of Engineers campsite, they actually had showers available there too. And for $8, boy, that was a great deal, that campsite with showers. It reminded me a lot of the types of hiker-biker sites that you're going to get on the West Coast that I've talked about so much as well. So that was really great to be able to camp every night. It was mostly free camping. Didn't have to wild camp at all. I was able to use pre-existing campsites, so that was really great, and enjoyed that a lot. So cheap camping or free camping each and every night. That worked out really well. I got showers also at the YMCA on Friday night to close out my camping and traveling adventure, which was really great. So those were all the highlights, and you'll hear a lot more of them if you decide to end up going with Pedalshift Tour Journals Volume 8. It was really fun to document that as I went along, and I'll have a preview of it that I'll share on a future pod, so you get a chance to hear what it sounds like and kind of try before you buy if you're interested in that. Lessons learned. Sugar isn't always your friend until it is. I have, as I mentioned at the top of the show, lost a lot of weight by saying no to sugar. And I found that I used it well for this ride. And at the end of it, I kind of reflected back on what I was eating, which was, candy bars and full sugar sodas and stuff like that. Stuff that I just normally wouldn't touch and haven't touched for months. And they were really helpful for giving me that boost of energy when I really needed it on some pretty hot, challenging days. But I didn't miss any of it. I found that I was using it more as fuel than because I really missed it. With a couple of exceptions. The Snickers bar. You are my friend, Snickers bar. I will say that. But I am okay saying no to it unless I'm on a tour. So good for fuel, not so good for health. There's a great book. If you want to listen to, read a great book or listen to the audiobook version of it, The Case Against Sugar by Gary Taubes. That has some really interesting stuff in it if you are interested in learning more about my take on sugar these days. Another lesson learned. Hydrate and block the sun. On hot, steamy days, it's counterintuitive to cover yourself all up with long sleeves and whatnot and wide-brimmed hats, but it really made a difference. That first day, doing 70 miles for me normally loaded is tough without the heat. So with the heat, the fact that I was able to do it, I really have to chalk up to A, the fact that I've lost some of the weight, but B, also really eliminating the amount of exposure to the sun. And I did that by covering up. I also hydrated a lot. I drank a metric crap ton of water, technical term. And I think that really helps a lot. I mean, that's just duh, but make sure you've got plenty of water. Carry extra water. I had 3 water bottles and I had a 100-ounce water bladder that's from a Camelback. And that was just so critical to have on these days. I never came close to running out. I was down to like maybe 40 or 50 ounces in the bladder. That was sort of my emergency store that I had to tap into at one point. But for the most part, I was able to fill up along the way and it worked out really well. Some of these trails don't have really good access to water. So it's just good to make sure that you've got a lot with you. And then you don't have to worry about it. And that's the one thing that I find with a lot of folks who ride with just one water bottle. I'm reading a lot how I ran out of water. And I'm just like, that's why I like having lots of water carrying capacity on my bike. It's just nice to have. And then I don't have to think about it. And I don't ever have to worry about dehydrating because that sucks. Lighter is better, which seems to be counterintuitive considering I just said I like to carry a lot of water. I pared down my gear list again and did it in between that ultralight list that I talked about 2 shows ago and what I do as a heavy ride. And it was interesting as I was leaving to go to the train station and had all my stuff packed up on the bike. Kimberly was like, "Wow, you're bringing a lot less stuff this time. You're not bringing anything." And I thought, no, I'm actually bringing a lot. I'm bringing the tent and all of the things that I need. It's just that I've pared it down so I don't need to bring big bags to carry it all. And I think I just got a little more efficient with that. But lighter is better, whether it's you physically or the stuff that you carry. It just is. So for those of you who are thinking more about bike packing and borrowing bike packing elements, I really, really think that you're on the right track because I'm starting to feel that way myself as well. And on that same note, the last of the lessons learned, frame bags are dope. That frame bag that I got was really, really helpful. And it was, I thought not huge capacity, but what was really great about it was I could carry food in there. I could carry a bunch of things. It was like a secondary handlebar bag. And my handlebar bag is way overloaded almost all the time. So it was really good to have stuff that was there that wasn't on the rear of the bike like so many other things are. And it was easy to use and out of the way. Since I've been home, I've been finding that I stow my locks inside there. I do all sorts of things. I've kept it on my bike, even though I'm not on tour anymore. I just think that they're really, really helpful. So I would recommend it. I got this cheap $15 one off of Amazon. I mean, you look it up, just look up frame bag. You'll probably find it just as easy. It's really pretty good. And for $15, cheap, easy. It wasn't very waterproof. I did try to treat it, but, I would say I'm intrigued with the possibility of getting one that is more waterproof. I know that the Ortlieb one is pretty well thought of, and we talked about it on a past show, of course, about different brands of stuff that's out there. So that's basically it. I mean, a lot of yakking about a really good tour. And, like I said, there's much more coming. Pedalshift Tour Journals Volume 8, Western Penn, will be available coming soon, and I'll do a preview for you here on the pod in the future. Next up on the show is Gear Talk, and I just ran into this today, just a real quick section of Gear Talk for the show. It's an article that says, ride your bike faster or with less effort using a partial fairing. And I had no earthly idea what a fairing was, much less a partial fairing. And what it is basically a windshield for your bike. And the idea behind it is that it overcomes air drag when riding in an kind of the more upright style as a commuting bike, or in that sort of in between style that we do as tourists. So like if you've got drop bars, you're a little bit hunched down. Maybe you're on the top of the bars. You're not all the way down in kind of a speed mode. When you're somebody like me, there's all sorts of different types of bar setups, of course, but I find that I'm in sort of the halfway down mode. This article was really intriguing because it suggests that having a partial fairing, so like having a windshield where you're normally just looking over it, not like a full one that's covering your whole, face and body and whatnot, which I guess they make, but that can reduce the amount of watts, the power that you need to overcome air drag by a fairly substantial amount, at least a measurable amount. I'm just going to read the quote here. When used in combination with a road bike in touring position, that's with hands on the handlebar. I don't know where else they would be. A partial fairing brings the power required to overcome air resistance at 35 kilometers per hour down to 157 watts. This compares to 220 watts for an unfaired road bike in touring position and 176 watts for an unfaired road bike in a much less comfortable crouch position and wearing tight clothing. Things that I don't tend to do. So, I thought that was really intriguing, going from 220 to 157 just by having this little dopey windshield. I'm kind of intrigued with that as an idea. The one thing that the article talks about also is that it looks kind of silly, and it kind of does. You can take a look at the picture in the article. It looks a little, I don't know, sci-fi or something. I don't know. It doesn't look quite right. Plus, it would be blocking all sorts of different things like handlebar bags and things like that. I think that there are other arguments against it. But also the other issue is that side winds, it might be difficult because they may catch that partial fairing like a sail and kind of push you around, which of course you don't really want. But I was kind of intrigued with that, and that's why I wanted to share it on this episode of Gear Talk. So, take a look at it. I'd be curious what you think. I don't know if anybody out there rides with these. It's probably a little more common with a recumbent. So any of you recumbent tourers, this might be something to consider as well. I'm intrigued with it as just the idea of breaking the wind resistance. So partial fairings, check into them. Next up on the show, connections. We've got a 5-star review from Pedaling Pear. Binge-worthy. This was a couple of weeks ago, so sorry I wasn't able to get this on an earlier show. Wow, so glad I stumbled upon this podcast back in February, sitting on a stationary bike in a gym I hated to be at. It got me through the winter, and this morning I finished catching up after binging every episode from start to finish. I live in Utah, where winters are long. Having Pedalshift to listen to, getting me ready for spring when I could get back out on my bike was just the thing I needed. Thank you, Tim Mooney, for all the care and detail you give to this podcast and bicycle touring. And Douglas also wrote in and mentioned that they are going to be, they meaning he and his wife, are going to be doing a pretty substantial amount of touring over the course of the next, looks like year or so. You can check them out over at Pedaling Pear on Instagram. So Douglas, thank you for writing in and really appreciate that 5-star review. And gosh, have a great ride. This looks really good. Starting in San Luis Obispo, heading south to San Diego, riding the ACA Southern Tier to St. Augustine, then down to Key West and back up to Miami, then going to Europe for a tour that'll go a year or more with no end in sight. That sounds pretty good. So enjoy that, Douglas, and best of luck to you. And I will definitely be following you at Pedaling Pear on Instagram. Also got an email from new listener Kim regarding the Ohio area. She is from the area. She knows South Ohio a little bit, and she had some concerns or maybe at least some feedback on the route that I had considered from 2 episodes ago. And I'm going to be updating that in the very near future based on her suggestions. But Route 22, she says in particular, is quote unquote horrible for a bike. No berm, lots of hills, big and active in fracking right now, which I know has been an issue in North Dakota for the Northern Tier route. In fact, the ACA, I know because of all the trucks from fracking in that area, rerouted the Northern Tier route away from all of that. So I am going to probably say that the idea of connecting Cleveland the way that I did it is probably not a great idea. So what I might do is consider some of the suggestions that she made and kind of stick that all together. That'll still be available in the show notes there. And like I said, I'll be following up on all of that in a future show. And especially if I end up doing this ride, I'm really intrigued with connecting up Cleveland with the portions of the route that I did in Western Pennsylvania. Just figuring out the right way to do it is something that I'm struggling with a little bit. And I think that between help from listeners like Kim and the changes that have been made over at the Eastern Express site, I think that this is something that we'll be able to do. So it would be kind of cool to be able to link that all up. And then what that does is it expands the Capital Limited's kind of scope and help for bicycle touring here in the Northeast and in the Midwest as well, and what you can do to connect with all of those different places. So more to come on all of that. Kim, thank you so much for your feedback there and for connecting with the show. That was super useful information, and thanks for being a new listener. I really appreciate it. And we look to close out the show with a big thank you to all of our monthly supporters of the Pedalshift Project, who are members of the Pedalshift Society. If you like what you hear, you can help me keep the show listener supported while expanding the offering. We're talking $5 a month, $2, or even $1 a month. Helps with the cost of hosting the podcast and the website. And you can do it for a bit and cancel at any time. One-shot support is also welcome too, so if you're not into that small monthly thing, we can make that work. Check it out, pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Ethan Georgie, Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lane, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Josiah Matthews, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Seth Krieger, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Noah Schroer, Harry Telgadas, John Sikorsky, Richard Killian, Chris Barron, Scott Taylor, Brian Wren, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Paul Mulvey, Stuart Buchan, Todd Stutz, Mr. T, Roxy Arning, Nathan Poult, Harry Hugel, Ferguson Meek, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, and new this month, Ruth Divorcey, Michelle Miller, and also a big thank you to all anonymous and past contributors for making the show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net. Lots of great content. You can hear the Pedalshift Project through iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregator. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his debut album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Habitat, wherever cool music is available.